Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Promoting the Georgia Oyster discussion. Give us a second. A few more people will be joining us. I want to go ahead and let everybody know two of our presenters, who are up in Athens. There's a hurricane tornado warning happening up there. So they had to go seek shelter. Hopefully we will have them back shortly. So if at the end of the day, if they're not able to make it back in time, we'll have a slightly modified version of it, but I hope everybody can appreciate the seriousness of that. And if I could ask you to go ahead and, if you haven't already, to mute yourself. And the other thing too is we are recording this, and just like some of our previous discussions, we will put this up on our Coastal Georgia Tourism discussion page. I'll be sure to put the link in that into the chat room with that, but we can go ahead and get started because we do want to be sensitive to everyone's time. And like I said, if Katie Hill, who's our speaker, if she's not able to make it back in time, we'll have a modified introduction. But my name is Brian Flick. I am the Associate Marine Extension Director with UGA's Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. Also, Sarah Lynn Stafford, who's with UGA's Carl Vinson Institute of Government. She's our Rural Development Manager. She and I have been coordinating these coastal discussions, coastal tourism discussions now. It seems like it's been an eternity, but we started last year because of the fact that we were not able to hold the Coastal Georgia Tourism Conference like we had done originally in 2019. So hopefully we'll get back to that eventually. But just to provide context, if you were not there in the fall, we had hosted a series of facilitated discussions, much like this one, on 3 of the 5 pillars that's part of the Department of Economic Development's Tourism Strategic Plan, and one of those being Georgia-grown food and drink. And during that discussion, we talked about opportunities for partnerships and collaboration and specific topics, and the issue of seafood, in particular oysters, did come up several times. And so this was a continuation of those discussions. And obviously, as you can tell that the focus of this will be specifically on oysters, and we'll provide a little bit more context. But I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Lynn really quick to give a kind of an overview of what we're doing today. Again, this will be recorded, and hopefully it'll be an opportunity to generate some really good discussion. But I'm going to let Sarah Lynn take over for a second.
Hello, everybody. As Brian said, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. We want to see if Katie comes back from the tornado drill first, but this is what we're planning to do today. We're going to talk about oysters. Hope y'all are all in the right meeting. So Brian and I are kind of going over our agenda for the day and talking about why we're doing this. Katie Hill is planning to make the project overview, but if she's not able to get back in time, we have several other team members on with us who will be able to pick up the pieces. Then we're going to break out into 2 or 3 breakout rooms and use the murals to do the breakout sessions as we did back in November. Everybody seemed to like those. It worked pretty well. And we'll have about 25 minutes into those breakout rooms to talk about some of the issues that Katie and her team members are going to bring up. And then we'll have a reporting out session, and then we'll wrap up. We should be through no later than 2:15, possibly earlier. We'll just have to see how it goes. Any questions about the agenda for today? Is anybody hungry looking at the oysters?
All right. So
all right.
What we'll do is we're going to let Hunt Revel, who is a Sea Grant, one of our Georgia Sea Grant legal fellows, who's also involved working with Katie and her other colleagues from Carl Vinson Institute of Government, just set the stage, since Katie's not able to do that, but just set a stage of where they're coming from in this actual project, because what it'll do is set context, provide some context for when we actually break out into the groups. So Hunt, I'm going to turn it over to you if you just want to provide an overview of what we're going to be discussing today.
Absolutely. Y'all, my name's Hunt Revel. I'm a law student at Georgia State, but a UGA alumnus and an oyster restaurant former manager. And what you're going to see is a rough draft of what Katie's presentation was going to be today, but a lot of the same info. And then I'm going to let Scott talk to you about the actual projects that the Carl Vinson Institute and UGA Sea Grant are working on, because I'm a student and mostly just doing the legwork. But I've been studying the law. And what Georgia has done in 2019 is passed a new law to allow for oyster farming on a much more economically scalable way, using more modern techniques. As you may know, oysters in Georgia, let's see if I can move my fella here, sorry. Oysters in Georgia have been around forever and in North America, but in Georgia in particular, what you get are great oyster clumps for oyster roasts, and that's kind of the way that they're grown in Georgia's tidal marshes, both for ecological reasons and an overabundance, for example, of spat that grows oysters. So there's a ton of that floating out in the tidal marshes of Georgia, but not a ton of shell for it to attach to. Oyster farming, which is what Georgia's new law sort of permits and leases, provides for these sort of floating cages and other devices that allow you to grow a more single oyster on the half shell, as opposed to a clump that needs to be roasted and broken apart. The farms will now allow for you to kind of manicure a pretty single that oyster restaurants like the one I managed for the last 5 or 6 years prefer. They're easier to shuck, they're easier to store. You get a little more nuance and flavor and taste, and just kind of a different side of oyster industry. And also a side effect is you preserve the wild oyster population, which isn't necessarily a problem in Georgia, but up and down the eastern coast in particular, overharvesting and pollution and things have killed off a lot of the wild oyster beds. One of the other benefits are the economics, and I know y'all are the tourism folks, so one of the things that you will see are increased revenues across the Southeast in particular, but in other states, and this is just kind of a snapshot of what oyster farming has permitted. A lot of these states had great wild oyster harvests in general, but oyster farming has increased the amount of revenue coming in. Here's a quick comparison of the landing revenue just in some southeastern states. Georgia's law kind of mimics North Carolina's in a lot of ways, and certainly the regulations that have followed the law and the people that are implementing these new leases and permits in Georgia are looking closely at Florida and South Carolina and Alabama, who have all had a lot of growth and seen a lot of the other issues that will come up from time to time. Delaware and Rhode Island are just included on there as small little northeastern states that have not traditionally had huge wild oyster harvests, but do have very vibrant oyster farming programs. Last but not least, as I mentioned, wild oysters are great for the environment. They filter 50 gallons of water a day. They serve as reef habitat for other fish and wildlife. They prevent erosion. They help potentially with sea level rise. And old oyster shell is actually legally required to go back in the water from farmers that harvest wild oysters. But discarded oyster shell can also be used in this picture in nets and bags to sort of rebuild the coast. So there's a coastal resilience and water quality kind of ecological benefit to all this as well. Most recently, Georgia has, the state has now put through public notice and comment its first oyster farming leasing sites. This is right off of Sapelo Island, the Sapelo Sound, what's known as the Mud River. And these we're set to go June 1st. We've heard they might actually be leased out before that through a new legal lottery system that's part of what I've been studying in Georgia's law. But this is just an example. These are going to be 3 or 4 different 10-acre sites to start, and there's 3 or 4 more to follow in this location, and then at least 4 more locations that DNR is hoping to site in the next year or two up and down the Georgia coast, covering all the coastal counties that could be available for this farming. This is a rendering of what an oyster lease site will look like from a really talented designer, not me, the Carl Vinson Institute for Government has hired. So you sort of can see on the bottom screen there what the lease site might look like from the water. The lines of cages will probably not be that straight given tides and waves and things, but that's kind of what it'll look like from the water. And the floating cages there are one of the main types of cages that are used by farmers. And then you get a little context for the lease site in the map. The law has a lot of regulations about where these things will be sited, which includes off land and deeper water, not necessarily near big public places for navigation or recreational fishing. That's part of the requirements that the law does to avoid conflict with other users of the public waters here. So Scott, with that, I think I'll let you talk more about the projects that, yeah, or Katie's back. I couldn't
Let her do it.
You been back the whole time?
No, I just stepped in, and thank you so much for doing that. Hey everybody, I'm Katie Hill, and I just came back from the basement where we all were sheltering. And it looks even squirrelier outside now than it did when the warning came up. So if you hear thunder or if I suddenly run away again, I apologize. But I will very quickly let y'all know why we're here today and seeking your input. So we have 3 oyster projects going on right now. The first of these was funded by the Jamestown Foundation. Sorry.
You were serious about that. Yeah.
It's quite stormy out here and it's slightly scary. The Jamestown Foundation is a real estate development company that I believe was behind Pond City Market in Atlanta and some other neat developments across the South. And they have a charitable foundation arm that is one of their priorities is focused on sustainable food systems and kind of like place-based food stuff. And so they've been interested in helping support the growth of this oyster aquaculture industry in Georgia. And what they came up with and asked us to do is a strategic plan to help promote the Georgia oyster. And what we mean by promote is, make sure we have the things in place, pardon me, a little frazzled, to grow them, move them, and get them in people's bellies. We're not talking about the regulations for this project, but gosh darn it. I might be being told to go down to the basement again. Why is the phone ringing?
I tell you what, Katie, if you want to, because of that, just for you, Scott, do you maybe want to step in and just provide that overview?
They're calling to cancel it, Katie. They're canceling the tornado warning.
Oh, I guess it is 1:15 now. So yeah, as Katie was saying, the Jamestown Foundation has funded us to work with people involved in the industry who are looking to get into the industry and in other stakeholders around the industry to understand their interests in it and to help plot a course forward and how people can work together and how different aspects of the industry can be pulling in the same direction and try to spur this growth as quickly as possible. At the same time, we're also working on additional projects funded by NOAA, both directly and then through the Georgia Sea Grant to do some research about what's going on in other states, what are the problems and issues that have come up under their sort of regulatory schemes and local government regulations, and then how we can learn from that and sort of establish best practices. So what we're here to talk about today is how folks involved in coastal tourism see Georgia oysters being part of that, and then how we can help put that into that strategic plan and help understand the perspective of the tourist industry and how it can relate to what we're doing, looking at in other states and how other states have successfully leveraged the oyster industry to promote tourism and to promote sort of place-based travel and that sort of economic development. So that's really what we're here to talk about. I'll look to Brian and Hunt and see if I left anything out.
Well, Scott, I think that your team has also been doing these sessions with others that are involved with the oyster industry or hope to be.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So like I said, we're working with all the aspects of the industry that we can identify, from the growers themselves to seafood markets to restaurateurs, in trying to explore all the different sort of economic development angles of this. And so, like I said, this is meant to explore the tourism aspect of it and how identifying the Georgia oyster as a distinct thing, having that sort of place-based recognition of the quality of the Georgia oyster. Because in my experience, Georgia does have the most delicious and finest oysters I've ever had. And I think there's an opportunity to share that with people and sort of build that identity both of Georgia and of it as a product. And so that's what we want to talk about, is what are the opportunities to do that.
So thank you, Scott and Katie, everyone else again, especially putting up with the storms. Yeah, the only thing I want to reiterate on this, again, that this, the focus of these discussions are not going to be about regulations. That's a whole separate context. So the other thing I want to make sure I do before we break out, any of us that have run Zoom meetings or any type of virtual know the challenges of what you don't see on the screen. I want to make sure that I introduce Sam Parent with the UGA's Archway program, and he, just like our coastal tourism discussions, he is kind of running the point person and breaking us up. So just definitely want to say thank you to Sam and UGA Archway for helping us, because we realize it really makes a huge difference when you've got someone behind the curtain being able to do this. So I appreciate everybody's patience, and since we had to modify it a little bit, obviously safety is the priority, but what we're going to do is actually break out into two groups, since we've got a small enough group here. And again, we'll have note takers. I believe Sarah Lynn and I will be using the mural program, but hopefully in our groups we'll have a chance to introduce each other, and you'll see the questions that are posted, and we'll go over that and hopefully have an opportunity to share. And I will say, just like we did last time with the discussions, we will put your, what you're saying up on the notes, but if you have additional information or things that are useful, use the chat function too. I will say, when we had those discussions, whether it was the food and drink or the outdoor recreation, the participants provided a lot of just additional information that was really valuable, and so no different this time. But with that being said, I'm going to let Sam do his magic and break us out into our two groups.
I think we're back, right?
All right. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for taking some time away from your schedule and dodging tornadoes and other technical glitches and other forces of nature that we all live with these days. But I really do appreciate the comments, and obviously I didn't get to hear the other groups, but the comments that we had in ours, I think are really valuable. So I think what we wanted to do, it was to have just kind of a summary from each group on what were some of the answers or some of the comments from these different discussion points. And it looks like Sarah Lynn's got her screen up. This one's mine actually, so we'll take that back. And Lee, do you want me to go over these, or do you want to provide an overview of some of the things discussed?
I was muted. Sorry. Go ahead. And if I feel like there's something to add, I'll jump in.
Sure. Absolutely. So as far as, this first question here about, given what you've heard, how could it be part of coastal tourism? One of the central themes was this idea that this presents an opportunity to really kind of dive in for some experiential opportunities, whether that's, just the eating part itself, but also just the educational side, really, because you're talking, just like with most seafood, how it's harvested, by whom, but we felt that that it really presents itself from kind of the very beginning to the consumption piece, a real opportunity to really blend itself into coastal tourism here in Georgia, because there is such a draw already to our seafood. So that was kind of let me see, I think. Yeah, well, I'll get into some of the apps too, but you see, promoting tours. Oh yeah, the idea of tours, and this kind of lends into that second question about strategies. Going back with the educational piece, everything from we all agreed that the social media piece was going to be huge. Just now, especially after post-pandemic, how digital a lot of us are, and being able to have ready to use information. So the concept of the seafood trail came up. And potentially a downloadable app that showed map and these locations of not only where you could eat it, but potentially tours. And that was something that was brought up again, this idea of whether that's being able to go visit a site where it's harvested, to seeing the processing, to learning how to cook it. We mentioned about even working with the breweries being a key potential target audience as far as the restaurants have been able to promote, because being able to pair this with not only different beer, but, you know, even bars and being able to pair different drinks. So, you know, we talked about videos being a good way of being able to highlight this. And, you know, we talked about social media influencers. Maybe this would be a good opportunity to pair different types of drinks with Georgia Oysters to get people more interested in it. And we did mention David Zelski, who already had been doing some videos with Georgia Grown with some seafood products, so that we could potentially build on that. And then when it came to the potential conflicts or not, overall, you know, the answer was really not, you know, not perceived as many barriers. The fact that this could actually add value to what we already have on the coast. The comments that, you know, when people come here, most people aren't just doing one thing, that this could actually be another attractant for people to visit our coast. But the comment about collaboration was being a key thing. So hopefully make the opportunity of bringing groups together, because the topic of bandwidth, you know, no one single entity having that to be able to help promote it, the oysters could be value added in the sense of trying to just further promote our seafood industry, whether it's something like shrimp that's long been in existence, or in this case, oysters. And leave out, or anybody from our group miss anything?
I think that was a good summation.
Again, group, thank you for your input on that. It was very helpful. So Sam, I guess if we switch it over to the second group.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to share a Word document first, because I could not get the mural to work. It was awful. But I switched over to the old-fashioned Word doc, and I think I captured it in a different way, but at least we have it. So our group also had discussion about culinary trails, just in general, maybe as an oyster trail, but maybe also as a seafood trail. It was mentioned that we already have a lot of people that are interested in the shrimp industry and looking at shrimp boats, and so this could be a tie-in that way. To tie the restaurants and breweries with the oyster farming market is Georgia Oyster, so that's very similar. There's a lot of similarities in the two groups. The blessing of the fleets in Brunswick and Darien are great connections to Georgia seafood that could also add to opportunities to promote Georgia oysters. We have Laura with the Satilla River Keepers in our group, and she talked about they already do eco tours at low tide, and they could add in tours to see the new oyster farms. It also ties in very much with their mission that water quality is so important. They do an oyster roast as a fundraiser, like a lot of other organizations. And we followed up and found out that it's very important to them that they use Georgia oysters for that, and also particularly from the Satilla River watershed, if at all possible. Riverkeeper organizations do other events like fishing tournaments, where there also could be discussion about oysters and getting people engaged through their websites in learning more about Georgia oysters. Scott was kind of delving a little bit why the trail. What's the main thing about that? Is it the direct connection to the farming operation itself, or is it the tie between Georgia oysters and the restaurants and breweries that serve them? And the answer, kind of consensus, was it's more about how to consume rather than seeing the farms. But it would be good to observe, maybe with a tour guide, especially if there were a tasting room like the wineries. So Katie wondered if there was any particular interest in branding or swag, and the answer was yes, but not so much that as having a place where people could find out about Georgia oysters, where they could have a list of everything related to Georgia oysters and plan their visits. And I think y'all had something similar to that too. You know, how do you get that information out? There were a couple of questions a little bit different about how many oyster farms there will be. And we don't really know that yet because we're just getting started. And Katie, I might not have captured this information right. It sounded like you told me that each farm lease was going to be 10 acres. Is that correct?
Yes, the ones that they're just about to put out for lease are 10 acres each.
Totally huge, yes. And Scott mentioned that part of the work that we're doing here through this effort is to help growers with understanding where those opportunities might be as they grow their businesses, since we are just getting started. Dan asked if there were any funds for equipment purchases for the oyster farmers, and the answer to that is no, not at this time. And then I will see if I can pull up the mural. So Sam jumped in, saved the day. That's why we have Sam helping us. And he brought his mural over. And so we captured some of the information toward the end on this. So Georgia Oyster Roast, connecting to water quality, the non-governmental organizations that are about environmental will all be interested in that. So Sam's going to share. Integrating with other tourism museums, like the Saltwater Geechee, Native American. So that's a history tie-in. There are a lot of people during the history of Georgia that have relied on oysters. So that's a definite tie. Katie was asking specifically, are there other kinds of buckets besides an oyster trail where we might be able to tie in and encourage people to learn more about it? So that's one of the answers to that. It was mentioned that we needed to inform people who are interested in the Georgia coast about oysters, and then vice versa. Those who are interested in oysters, inform them about the Georgia coast. So that's another marketing opportunity. Trying to frame and connect the oysters with everything else that we're doing. So we talked about what's useful about getting the strategies for getting the word out. Again, the oyster trails definitely taking advantage of the visitor centers and other methods that are already used by other tourism efforts. Connecting to restaurants. I like this one about a chef's collaborative. So we have the chefs that are interested in serving Georgia oysters and have some kind of collaborative effort to do the promoting. And then the co-branding with the Georgia Grown. And then we were running out of time. So there was a question about, do you anticipate any user conflicts? And really, the answer was Georgia is one of the only states that hasn't already been in the industry of farming oysters. So probably we ought to look to our neighboring states that have had an oyster farming business in place and see what their conflicts have been. And that way, maybe we can address them ahead of time. So did we cover everything, y'all? Yeah.
We sure did. One thing that I just wanted to highlight again was, it was really interesting. Laura early was talking about, all the other kind of buckets of types of tourist attractions on the coast. There's a potential to put those all through the lens of the oyster. It was a very interesting concept. So we'll think some more about that over here.
Deal. All right. Again, thank you everybody for your comments. I do want to let everybody know, just like we did last time, we will put the recording of this discussion up on the Coastal Georgia Tourism discussion page with the other ones we'll do. We'll take the notes and compile those as well. The other thing too, because we had I know some comments were made in our group about, if I have additional ideas. I realize when it's kind of withstanding the tornadoes that we've had, it's always sometimes when you have these breakout groups virtually, you remember something the minute you hang up. So Katie just put her contact information in the chat. Please reach out to her, because this is one of the things from their strategic plan. They definitely want to get the input from these different stakeholder groups, and because of the importance of tourism, definitely don't want to be missing out any of that aspect. And hopefully we continue to build upon this so that we actually see some of these actions built out. And Katie, I just want to ask the last one question. Can you provide maybe a little bit of timeline of when you anticipate the strategic plan being wrapped up, and some opportunities, or if there might be opportunities down the road for additional input or feedback?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll kind of get to your second point there first, which is if anybody here, like Brian said, has any additional ideas or wants to talk to me about anything oysters, please shoot me an email, give me a call. I'll be happy to talk with you. If you know of anybody else who you think we should be speaking to who's not here today, please give me their names, and if you have it, contact information, and I'll reach out to them. And if you're talking with anybody else and oysters come up and they say, "What? I didn't know there were going to be oysters in Georgia," and they have ideas, please pass along my contact information to anybody who you care to, except for if they're going to call about my car warranty, because it is not. So, and then second, the first thing, we should be scheduling a meeting of our steering committee for this strategic plan, another one coming up pretty soon. And we hope to have the whole process completed by this fall. Maybe it'll be about around the time of the of Marine Extension's Oyster Roast for a Reason that we'll be completing it. And if we do, perhaps we'll have a workshop or something introducing the plan, you know, maybe the day before. That's just a not even half-baked idea, but sometime this fall we should be introducing that.
And the other thing, I haven't even said this to Katie yet, but the other thing, Sarah Lynn and I definitely plan on.
You can buy me some oysters, Brian.
I will do that. And see, now you have it recorded, but we certainly do plan on following up from the discussions that we've been having at our next. We do plan on having another Coastal Georgia Tourism Conference when we can finally get back in person. And these are the types of projects that we want to be able to follow up and report on, because, you know, we're not just doing these discussions for the, you know, for no other reasons, but we actually want to move forward and show what has been done. So I would hope that would be another opportunity, even though we have not set a date for the next one. This should be another example of how we can continue building momentum. And, you know, someone in our group talked about bandwidth. That's the whole reason we're having these discussions, because, you know, no one entity can do it all. And it's where can we leverage resources to be, you know, become the most effective means of these efforts. So hopefully you will definitely be able to have a follow-up conversation about that. So Katie, any other comments from you?
I don't think so, but thank you all so much for participating. We really do appreciate it. And you know where to find me if you'd like to talk some more about this.
All right. So with that being said, also Scott, Lee, Sarah Lynn, Sam, Hunt, thank you guys so much for helping kind of behind the scenes. And thank you for taking the time to, you know, away from you. I know everybody's busy to provide this input. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.